Hi, my name is Ophi. YouTube videos. I am a feminist and a lesbian, and I make conversational commentary videos about both of those things. I have been talking a lot recently about the It Ends With Us fallout, and you can find my whole Baldoni Baloney playlist linked in the description below. I've tried to be very clear in my framing when I talk about the Blake Lively versus Justin Baldoni legal disputes and the ensuing media and social media fallout from that. The larger situation here can actually be summed up very simply. Blake Lively, an actress in a movie Justin Baldoni was co-starring in, directing, and producing, threatened to leave production if she was not granted a list of protections in order to return to set. Wayfarer, the production company responsible for the movie, agreed to that list of protections, one of which included that Lively would not be retaliated against. And then Baldoni hired a crisis PR firm to retaliate, with an immensely successful smear campaign that many people jumped on just for fun and profit, and because they hate women. When everybody jumps into this conversation about the ensuing lawsuits and media coverage, they're quick to forget that this is a story about workplace sexual harassment and ensuing retaliation. It turns instead into a conversation about Blake Lively in particular doing terrible, tone-deaf marketing for It Ends With Us and stealing Justin Baldoni's movie. A movie that's been implied since last summer would obviously have been so much more respectful if it only had Baldoni's influence and not Blake's, despite, still being adapted from a Colleen Hoover book. So, the other main criticism levied against Blake Lively, if we can ignore Bully and Mean Girl for the sake of this one video, is that she stole Justin Baldoni's movie. And because nearly every accusation seems to be a confession from our poor little soaking wet meow meow, I would like to spend today's video telling you a bit about the horrible, terrible marketing for a horrible, terrible Justin Baldoni directed movie that has a more solid basis for claims of it being stolen. We're not talking about It Ends With Us today. We are talking about Justin Baldoni's directorial debut, 5 Feet Apart. But first, I would once again like to thank my friends at Aura for sponsoring today's video. Bank of America recently announced a data breach, and the really disturbing part is they didn't tell anyone about it for months. It's not even the first breach that they've had to announce this year, and last year, Citigroup and JP Morgan Chase both also announced breaches, which means that your bank could be breached right now, and you could be months away from even learning about it. On average, it takes a company 277 days to report a breach, which is quite the head start for the bad actors who want to do nefarious things with your private information. That's why it's a really important time for me to be talking about today's sponsor, Aura. Aura keeps an eye out for me. They let me know if they find my phone number, my email, or my social security number on the dark web, and they would let me know fast if anyone tried to use that information to access my credit or my bank accounts. They also give me up to $5 million in identity theft insurance should the worst case scenario happen. They also provide a bunch of other features to keep you safe online, all inside one app. You can go to my link, aura.com/okidoki for 14 days for free, and that will be enough time to find out if any of your personal data is exposed. As in, you find out about it before one of these companies is forced to notify you months later. I highly recommend doing this now because the only thing most of those companies are going to do to help you after they let you know is offer free credit monitoring after the fact, which is kind of like installing security cameras after your house has been robbed. Look, I get it. There are so many data breaches, your social security number might as well be written on a bathroom stall. But if you haven't been a victim of fraud yet, why are you still rolling the dice? If it's because protecting yourself feels overwhelming, you can let Aura do all the hard work for you. I'm not leaving myself vulnerable to these data breaches, and if you don't want to either, you can go to aura.com/ofidoki to try 2 weeks for free. Thank you again so much to Aura for sponsoring today's video, and now let's get back to the meow meow, but let's stay about 5 feet apart from him. 5 Feet Apart is a 2019 tragedy romance movie starring Cole Sprouse and Haley Lou Richardson as two teens with cystic fibrosis who enter into a romantic relationship. The title, 5 Feet Apart, being a play on social distancing, which would be 6 feet, but one of the protagonists makes a romanticized decision to steal 1 foot back from the illness. In January of 2017, 5 Feet Apart was first announced by Deadline before the title, when it was just an untitled Justin Baldoni pitch in the vein of The Fault in Our Stars. From this article, we could see that the writers Mickey Daughtry and Tobias Akanias were already attached, that Baldoni would be directing and also producing through his production company, Wayfarer. Though I guess at least he didn't put himself in this one like It Ends With Us, he saved that for his very pregnant wife. And I need to ask you to walk with me here, because there are a lot of ways that this movie was fucked up, which means that until I tell you about the movie, we aren't even going to really be spending time on it explicitly just being a Fault in Our Stars rip that Baldoni decided to do. And also, doesn't that really inform him being excited about optioning It Ends With Us later? I think it would appear that the tragedy vampire keeps an eye out for books people talk about crying during, and since he couldn't swoop in time to adapt a John Green book, but found his movie adaptation of one very successful, he just kept an eye peeled. For now, we are brushing past that and into the ways that this movie seems to have truly mishandled the very loaded premise that it decided to romanticize. I'm trying to arrange these slights in some sort of order of severity, so bear in mind that it gets worse from here as we start by talking about the marketing, specifically the influencer marketing campaign that was done for this movie, a movie about a real-life genetic disease that actual immunocompromised and disabled human beings have. They partnered with 6 influencers from this, none of whom were in cystic fibrosis or even disability spaces, just general influencers. I'm reading from The Mighty here. The theme of physical distance seemed to inspire the film's advertising campaign, as the 6 Instagram influencers each explained in their sponsored posts how they can relate, because they've experienced a long-distance relationship. None of the influencers has cystic fibrosis or mentions having another chronic condition. For example, Annie LeBlanc wrote in her now deleted post,
"Thinking of my cousin Paige today. Similar to the new movie 5 Feet Apart. She's always been there for me even though we're separated by a distance. She lives in a different state but is always only a phone call away. She's always been someone who has taught me about compassion and being patient with others."
Jason Bartles shared, #ad, "My brothers moved away when I was younger and I miss them so much. I can relate to the characters in 5 Feet Apart film who can't hug or touch, but still help each other overcome life's obstacles. My brothers and I try to talk on the phone as much as possible, and they are always there for me when I need them. Tag someone who may not be near you right now, but will always be close to your heart. For each person tagged on my partner's post, $1 will be donated to cystic fibrosis research. Up to 5K. #5 feet apart. #love conquers all."
And there are more. The Mighty article write-up only listed a few, but I found another write-up that had quite a few more of them all put together. And they were 0 for 6. All 6 of these had to be removed because all 6 of these took a tone like, well, I'll just show you.
#ad. Long distance is difficult, but love finds a way to overcome all obstacles. At 5 Feet Apart film with Cole Sprouse and Haley Lou Richardson made me realize how thankful I am to have my mom in my life, even if we can't always be close to each other. Growing up, my mom was my best friend. I remember when I made the decision to move thousands of miles away to California. It was really hard on the both of us. She has always been there for me despite being thousands of miles away, FaceTiming me whenever I felt uneasy or uncertain about a situation. She's helped me become the person I am today. For that, I thank you for our relationship and the other relationships you have helped me build. Tag someone who might not be near to you right now, but will always be close to your heart.
#ad. Living in New York and having one of my best friends live in LA is so hard, just like in the movie 5 Feet Apart. I could really relate to the distance between people and how to overcome it. She has always been so supportive of me and knows just what to say when I'm feeling stressed or anxious. I feel like I can tell her anything. We FaceTime every day to stay close. Long-distance relationships can be really challenging, whether it's your best friend, family, or that special someone. Tag that special someone or friend you can't be with, but are close to your heart. For every person tagged on any partner's post, $1 will be donated to cystic fibrosis research. Up to 5K. #5 feet apart. Hashtag love conquers all.
Unfortunately, I have to keep going. Around the same time the ads were posted, media company Attention shared a now deleted video with a similar message. The video compared the physical distance Will and Stella must maintain due to cystic fibrosis in the film to the long distance relationship between a woman and her husband, who is serving in the military overseas. The Instagram ads and video immediately sparked outrage, both in and out of the cystic fibrosis community. Although navigating a long distance relationship with a loved one can be difficult, many argue it is very different than the distance a person with CF must maintain between themselves and others to protect against infection and therefore should not be compared. Oh man. There's a lot going on here, right? First of all, I do want to inject a little bit of nuance, even though we are going to be talking about how terrible I think this ad campaign is, and it's nuance that you'll also find reflected if you read my sources in the description below. Gunnar Azison also had some grace for this. I do not hold this against the 6 influencers in particular who said yes to that deal, right? Obviously, in a perfect world, they all would have said, "Ooh, I don't know that I should take that." And I don't hold against anybody who thinks that that was a bad choice. But I do want to say they were almost certainly pitched, "Hi, promote this movie and specifically speak about somebody you love who you are not close to." Gunnar wrote, to her credit, Bailey Madison has since deleted her Instagram post following pressure from the patient community, mainly comments on her post and a thread which appeared in the cystic fibrosis subreddit. I'm not going to put her post here since she put it down, but if you'd like to see it, it's in the subreddit link. If I had to guess, I'd say the posts and accompanying strategy were crafted by whatever PR team is supporting the film since they're all very similar. I don't think it's likely the influencers knew what they were getting themselves into, nor is it likely they realized clearly what they were writing about. For that reason, I do not fault them. The blame lies with the production company, the PR team, and project leader Justin Baldoni. Given the enormity of the profiles we're looking at, though, words matter, and God only knows how or why these things were approved. I guess the strategy is supposed to somehow relate to the invisible contact precautions between people living with cystic fibrosis, the distance between us. The posts have been widely criticized and elicited a good discussion amongst patients. And Bailey's post is no longer visible when I follow that link to the cystic fibrosis Reddit, but the post that had shared it is titled, "Thought you all would get a kick out of this completely irrelevant and ignorant sponsored post for 5 feet apart from some insta-famous person that doesn't even mention what cystic fibrosis is." So I'm just zooming back again here to say, I completely agree with Gunnar. The fault for this is with Wayfarer specifically. I agree it is with Justin Baldoni. I don't think that it's a worthwhile thing to try to cancel any of these influencers for this. Obviously, that is not at all the ethos of my channel. But also, how many people would this have had to run through? So divorcing it from the people who did this, who didn't know better, there are so many things so very wrong here. To take the prompt and make military propaganda, or to say, I understand what it's like to be immunocompromised and have a disabling condition on account of my cousin and I don't live in the same state. It's pretty unbelievable. And the fact that influencers with this little relevant life experience or existing advocacy around the subject were the ones who were asked to join in the promotional campaign is a much bigger issue than the individual influencers themselves making these tacky posts. As you probably noticed from those fantastic reads that I sourced from the Nuance Corner, thank you very much, they did mention cystic fibrosis at the very end, to mention a whole generous up to $5,000 fund matching thing, but only if you promoted the movie for them by tagging people under the post. I'm also not sure whether or not that still happened, given that all 6 influencers removed their posts. I was able to read from some cystic fibrosis patients and advocates. Again, here's from that article from The Mighty. Instagram user Jennifer at Battling to Breathe shared screenshots of several of the ads after they were deleted, explaining why they were so problematic for the cystic fibrosis community. Seeing these posts infuriate me that this is how they're sponsoring cystic fibrosis. They barely mention cystic fibrosis. Living in a different state from your family member and having to just do phone calls is nothing like two people with deadly bacteria who can get each other very sick by touching. This is being twisted out of context, and it's a shame. You can go visit your cousins, aunts, and uncles without possibly killing them. These are disrespectful, and frankly, I'm not going to stand for something like this. Don't add cystic fibrosis at the end like your last quick thought. Actually do research on the disease and inform people on what cystic fibrosis is, not this rubbish. This analogy is so far off, the comparison is lacking. Sorry, not sorry. Hashtag against this. Hashtag stop this. Hashtag educate yourselves. Now, the Wikipedia page says that Wayfarer apologized, but I have been completely unable to validate an apology from Wayfarer in my research for this video. I saw that some of the influencers themselves had individually apologized in the comments before their posts were deleted, and I am sure that them being deleted altogether was a decision made by the company that asked for the ads to be made in the first place. But I could not find any sort of statement from Justin Baldoni about what a misstep the marketing was for this directorial debut. The Mighty article was written after Gunnar Azeson's write-up was, and it says, others from the cystic fibrosis community, including advocate Gunnar Azeson, have called for an apology from director Justin Baldoni and the film's PR team. Though Baldoni and several cast members have previously spoken about how important it is to them to portray cystic fibrosis authentically and included cystic fibrosis advocates while making the film, we're going to get back to that. Many of those with cystic fibrosis believe that these ads send a different message entirely. To take back control of the narrative, Breathe In, a cystic fibrosis podcast, suggested the cystic fibrosis community post pictures on Instagram of what life with cystic fibrosis is really like using the hashtag #CFCommunityUnites. The Mighty has reached out to Justin Baldoni and has yet to hear back. So, no. The marketing crisis is mentioned on the Wikipedia page, and there is a seemingly hallucinated apology that I can't source at all. And I promise you, it's not that there's an apology that I don't want to tell you about, because I also don't think any apology would really sidestep the rest of the issues we're about to get into in the rest of this video. But I couldn't find one. If you find one, I will reply to my pinned comment with it, but I could not find any sort of statement from Justin Baldoni about what a misstep this marketing was for his directorial debut.
Following the deletion of this controversial ad campaign, the team released no official statement or apology, but soon after released a new social media campaign using the voices of some CFers. In an Instagram post, Justin Baldoni states that quote-unquote amplifying the voices of these CFers through unpaid advertisements was what the late Claire Winefield would want, and that if viewers are inspired by these posts, they should donate to the CF Foundation. They recruited 10 CF Instagrammers to share the same video and message on their accounts. As none of these posts are listed as being a hashtag ad or a post that is in partnership with, I'm going to infer that unlike the previous influencer posts, which did include these markers, that the CFers used by the marketing team were not being paid. One of these posters, long story short, also included the hashtag not sponsored, which further leads to my conclusion that this specific campaign was unpaid. And although some of these CFers did end up being recruited to make paid advertisements after the movie's release, it still stands that their initial labor was not rewarded in the same way it was for the teenage healthy influencers before. Whether or not these posters felt that their work was being exploited, it is still true that there was a discrepancy in the way that the marketing team treated their disabled influencers as compared to their healthy influencers.
That's Elsie Tellier, whose video you can find linked in the description below, confirming my suspicion about no official apology from the 5 Feet Apart people, and also telling you about the very first post chronologically on their Instagram account that actually even bothers to mention cystic fibrosis or any sort of mentioning of fundraising in its caption. Elsie was very vocal against 5 Feet Apart at the time it came out, along with many other people in the community. Her video and attached blog post spoke a lot about the backpatting that the 5 Feet Apart team was doing for raising awareness without much thought for the quality of that awareness it was raising. Is just teaching people the name of an illness you're misrepresenting actually very good representation? I do, unfortunately, need to dig just a little bit more into this marketing. This is stuff that is even more clearly on Wayfarer and Baldoni, and that we can't blame on influencers being young and naive and not knowing what they were getting themselves into because they were uneducated on cystic fibrosis. But there is another piece of off-key marketing for this film that I would like to discuss, particularly as it relates to what I set up in the intro about Lively being crucified for following the agreed-upon marketing plan for the Colleen Hoover adaptation. So this is part B to the marketing being bad, not something that I'm labeling as necessarily worse than the weird off-theme marketing about physical distance to try to make your tearjerker romance more relatable to the abled audience you're courting, something we will get more into later, because he's just assuming that the disabled people who he wants to watch the movie will be grateful for his crumbs. That's why the marketing for this movie is so weird. 5 Feet Apart, unsurprisingly for what it is, was doing a very teeny bopper marketing strategy from the film, even aside from this influencer campaign. From looking at their Instagram, it is super clear that they intended on leaning really hard into the existing fandom for Cole Sprouse, who was still making Riverdale at that point and had a large built-in teen girl audience. 5 Feet Apart was not subtle about their attempt to capitalize on this. Rule breaker, hopeless romantic, your next crush, winky face emoji. Watch at Cole Sprouse in hashtag 5 Feet Apart. Has hearing hi ever made you melt like this before? Leave a heart eyes emoji if you agree. Get tickets to see 5 Feet Apart now. Will Newman, aka at Cole Sprouse, is sending you a smile on hashtag World Kindness Day. Much of the other marketing was very standard teen romance movie bullshit, with absolutely no reference to cystic fibrosis, awareness, or fundraising in any of the captions. If cystic fibrosis came up, it was only in the context it was always coming up in this portion of the marketing, as a metaphor, an exciting thought experiment for an able-bodied audience, or as the plot device it serves as for the main characters. TFW, your idea of flirting is organizing a med cart. See no evil emoji. See at Haley Luhu as Stella in hashtag 5 Feet Apart in theaters March 22nd. 1 foot makes all the difference in the world if it means getting closer to the one you love. Earth emoji, purple heart emoji. Hashtag 5 Feet Apart is in theaters next Friday. Get tickets now. Tag someone who you're always looking to spend more time with. Winky face emoji, watch emoji. Tag someone you never want to get off the phone with. Heart eyes emoji, phone emoji. Some things are worth breaking rules for. A tagline they used quite frequently was some variation on Cole Sprouse's line where he says, "I'm so in," following Stella's decision to begin flouting social distancing rules by 1 foot so that they can date and inspire the audience or whatever. I do struggle to not find this more off-putting than "get your girls and your florals." How in are you to see hashtag 5 Feet Apart? Prove it. Get tickets now. We're so in. Heart eyes emoji. See hashtag 5 Feet Apart in theaters everywhere on March 22nd. And here's another one I find just infinitely worse and more upsetting than Get Your Girls and Your Florals. A contest Justin Baldoni, or Wayfarer, seems to have wanted to run where they specifically sourced emotionally distraught reactions to their inspiration porn movie. You know, kind of like the Survivor content Justin Baldoni wanted to source from people who had experienced domestic violence while he was advertising It Ends With Us and none of the stars wanted to be seen with him. Kind of exactly like that, actually. Did you feel all the feels while watching hashtag 5 Feet Apart? Prove it, purple heart emoji. Submit a video of your reaction using the hashtag and you just might be featured on our channels. They were using that. Is that really not worse than grab your girls and your florals? Can you really genuinely tell me that? Excluding the little bump interview, which was not from It Ends With Us promo, one of the main talking points that circulates is that it's like horrible and immoral and tone deaf for Blake to have talked about her hair care line and to have used lines like grab your friends and wear your florals. Grab your friends and wear your florals is language that was used on the official social media for the film. I don't believe that it was Blake Lively veering wildly off script. I think that it was likely a script that was given to her by Wayfarer. I have long been in the camp of It Ends With Us was always an adaptation of a Colleen Hoover book, and this is always how it was going to be marketed. Which means that I had more patience than most for how this movie that I was uninterested in was being marketed. It Ends With Us literally has a pretty floral cover. It is about a florist named Lily Blossom Bloom Colleen greenlit a coloring book based on the book. It never came out, but I do think that that tells you that she probably wasn't finding anything Blake Lively was doing to be too off base for how she conceived of her story. But something feels very different about this. Physical distance is exactly as hard as social distancing, and also, I'm not crying, you are motif for 5 Feet Apart, especially the deeper that we get into the layers of how fucked up this is. It's just gross to me. Exploitative in a way that seems to fit a larger pattern of the way I've sort of conceptualized Baldoni treating the terminally ill across multiple projects about them. Baldoni also has a mini-series called My Last Days, which seems to have been inspiration porn about how those with terminal illnesses live their lives to the fullest. My Last Days will come up again later, but it won't be on the test. Okay, there's no test, but My Last Days does come up later, and we will talk more about it then. 5 Feet Apart was marketed on being a sad, tragic movie that would make you cry, and also, occasionally, it seems to have benefited from pretending that it was about more than that, despite not seeing the people who actually live with the illness being used as a plot device as meaningfully worth engaging with the same way that they did the able-bodied influencers they wanted to hire. And we're staying on the theme of not caring to listen to actual advocates as we move into the second layer of this movie, striking me as so incredibly fucked up. I'd like to read again from another Refinery 29 article. The 5 Feet Apart team consulted with cystic fibrosis activist and YouTuber Claire Wineland, who passed away in September 2018, and the movie is dedicated to her. A retired cystic fibrosis nurse was also on set to advise on accuracy. However, Tellier points out that there were no people with CF in the writer's room or acting in the film. It goes back to the old disability rights movement mantra, nothing about us without us, she says. This is not to say that everyone with CF is against 5 Feet Apart. The movie has defenders within the community. Wineland's Foundation has promoted the film, and the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation writes that they are hopeful that the movie will be a positive opportunity to increase awareness of CF. Elsie called for a boycott of the movie during its release, and I think that her point about not having anybody with cystic fibrosis in the writer's room is an incredibly good one. Claire Wineland's passing happened before the final cut of the movie was done, and she and this retired nurse who was on set remain the highest authority Baldoni can borrow the credibility of. I don't actually know what kind of advising either Claire or the retired nurse were doing, or how open Baldoni was to hearing any of it, given that he seems to have had plenty of excuses about needing to get the movie below 2 hours long, and that being plenty of reason for creative liberties. Reading from Refinery 29 one more time here, Gunnar Azesen, who has covered the movie on his blog, points out that apart from the Instagram influencer campaign, the movie's social media advertising is unsettling, such as a tweet of the trailer captioned, "We're not crying, you are." He adds that the production company is also showing an unwillingness to recognize criticism from members in the community. And another activist named Julia Ray actually wrote something on her blog that confirms this. Huge thank you to the Reddit post linked in the description by several extent where much of this was dug up. Julia writes about Gunnar Azesen, actually. She says,
Gunnar Esiason, another incredible cystic fibrosis advocate, the third brother I've never wanted, is my close friend, but we've never met. We're both Rangers fans, and because he'll call me out on this, he is diehard. I just love watching hockey at Madison Square Garden. We have been to the same games, yet we still just weigh from 700 feet apart. Trust me, I'd love to grab a beer with Gunnar, but it isn't worth risking both of our lives. As public advocates for this illness, we understand how important it is for other patients to see how seriously we abide by infection control guidelines. I deeply care about Gunnar and his well-being. And when you deeply care about somebody, you don't want to risk their safety, their life. Romanticizing the breaking of these guidelines in the name of young love, as this trailer does, it's irresponsible. I voiced my concerns to Justin Baldoni on his Instagram post of the movie's poster. He responded arguing that he consulted with a CF patient and a CF nurse throughout the filming. In the end, he added, "This is a film, and creative license is always necessary to tell a complete story in 2 hours." I argue that infection control is a serious issue in the cystic fibrosis community. It is not a topic that allows any room for creative license, quote unquote. Moreover, there are plenty more creative ways that cystic fibrosis could have been brought to the silver screen. I felt compelled to write this op-ed because movies, movie stars, and the bright lights of Hollywood are extremely influential. The premise of the film and the trailer alone is a missed opportunity, and it's a dangerous misrepresentation of cystic fibrosis. The star of the film, Cole Sprouse, also stars in the wildly popular series Riverdale. He has 19.2 million followers. That's a lot of influence. I imagine many young cystic fibrosis patients are massive fans of his. I fear that they'll see this and think to themselves, well, maybe if the love of my life has CF. That thought is heartbreaking to me. My hope is that cystic fibrosis fighters get to see a movie in the future and walk away thinking, wow, look at all I can do with my life in spite of CF. If you're the parent of a young cystic fibrosis warrior, I hope you think twice about taking them or allowing them to see this film. I don't think the cystic fibrosis community should be grateful for or endorse a film that is this irresponsible in its depiction.
I'm linking to Gunnar, Julia, and Elsie's op-eds in the description below. You can and should absolutely read them for yourself. Right now, what I want to do is move even further through the levels of how awful this movie is. The marketing, which now includes the influencer campaign as well as their Instagram itself. The refusal to address concerns from people in the actual community. Justin even using a name that is not universally accepted or liked, referring to them as CFers rather than the cystic fibrosis community, which some cystic fibrosis patients like the word CFers, but it is pretty condescending, and I find it more than justified when people called him out for that. Especially because people were calling him out for that in conjunction with inaccuracies and with a portrayal of something very romanticized that could kill people and was not based on the actual scientific understanding of what distance between people with cystic fibrosis should exist. The 6-foot rule does not apply. They shouldn't even be in the same room, as we learned from Julia's op-ed. And Baldoni also, I think unsurprisingly, had no idea what the fuck he was talking about when he was marketing this movie any more than he did when he talked about domestic violence to market It Ends With Us. You are so in the way. It's like the most in the way you could possibly be. As mentioned, Baldoni was very excited to cast Cole Sprouse of Sweet Life of Zack and Cody and Smoking Inside on podcasts like a dickhead fame. And he was excited to do this on account of Cole Sprouse is so similar to his character Will, and also because, as mentioned, they wanted to capitalize on the existing Riverdale fandom, but also because Justin Baldoni believes that being a child actor is a good analog to growing up with cystic fibrosis. No, not a joke. And once again, you can't tell me seriously that you don't think this is worse than Grab Your Friends and Your Florals, because this is a clip I had to save to my computer as child acting is just like cystic fibrosis clip.
Another interesting thing about Colt, but here's something true. So when you have CF, when you spend a third or fourth of your life in the hospital, you grow up around doctors, you grow up around adults, and you have to grow up a lot faster than normal. And an interesting parallel is Cole grew up on television and grew up with producers and directors and adults in his life, and because of fame had to grow up faster. And I found a really interesting comparison between Cole and a lot of the kids I've met with CF, where they're just wise beyond their years.
I do want to talk a bit more about how Justin Baldoni, an able-bodied man with what I think we can class by now as a pretty persistent habit of creating dubiously marketed tragedy porn about experiences he himself cannot truly understand, let alone hope to redefine the way he wants to with cystic fibrosis. He acted, when he remembered that this movie was meant to be about that, as though he was doing a favor to the real-life people with that illness. A favor to play fast and loose with accurate representation or responsible things to model as romantic for the sake of creative license and fitting your movie into under 2 hours. Because he totally understood cystic fibrosis. He understood how it was like being a child actor, on account of children in hospitals and children on television sets both spend a lot of time around adults. I almost want to ask why he even bothered to specify that the plot device illness in 5 Feet Apart was cystic fibrosis. Why the idea wasn't just to be vague if they didn't want to feel a need to be married to accuracy. They certainly could have made something up, or left it to the audience to speculate while only using vagaries like immunocompromised, but instead they put themselves forward as these champions of a very rare disorder, as a mouthpiece, not as a platform. Something that struck me as I worked on the research for this video is that I saw so many of the same names again and again, referencing and sourcing each other, all speaking to Refinery 29, even with a range of opinions about just how offensive Baldoni's missteps were, or how dangerous the movie and its misrepresentations might be. But up until those later marketing campaigns Elsie mentioned, I don't see Baldoni as having chosen more than just one online advocate in the space. It was the one who passed away too soon to see the finished project, Claire Wineland. Not only does he not seem to have engaged further help for the finished project, the only other defense of himself is a retired nurse on set to advise on accuracy, you'll remember. He made excuses to the members of the community who did reach out to him. He did not engage them for his promotion the way he engaged able-bodied influencers. He did not compensate them financially via Wayfarer, and he likened their experience to that of a child actor or a long-distance relationship. And this is just such a fucked up thing. I would like to move from talking about the marketing into talking about the movie itself, and in order to do that, I have something that I think will serve as a really excellent bridge. This is a note from the Nuance Corner from Claude at Cannibal Gender, who also read one of those fantastic SpawnCon posts from earlier in the video.
I haven't thought about 5 Feet Apart in genuinely years, but I remember how bad it felt seeing the commercials for it as a teenager. For context, I'm someone who does not have cystic fibrosis, but I'm someone who was born disabled due to terminal illness and who has a heart and lung condition. I have friends from support groups that have CF. I've had a lot of similar life experiences, but I'm not an authority and I don't speak for the community. With that out of the way, I've always been pretty cynical when it comes to these Fault in Our Stars ripoffs in general. The genre of sicklet romance has always felt deeply exploitative and voyeuristic, but something about 5 Feet Apart really rankled me specifically. Going back to the marketing for this movie, I finally stumbled on exactly what it was that was bothering me about it for so long, and it's the fascination the movie has with the metaphor of being kept apart from the people you love. If I were forced to create a working definition for my own personal experience with inspiration porn, it would be the absorption of other people's literal physical illness as metaphor and motivation for your own personal struggle. Under this framework, disabled and ill people don't exist as autonomous beings. We're ephemeral, we're concepts. 5 Feet Apart kind of takes this to the most in-your-face possible conclusion, because cystic fibrosis doesn't seem to be a real illness in the film or in its marketing. Instead, it's a, quote, universal struggle that we can all relate to. But the life expectancy for people with CF is somewhere around 40 years. Mine right now is about 30. I'll be 26 in May. When I communicate that to people, they tend to try and mitigate their own feelings about it. They compile lists, they consult their Bibles. Terminal illness scares people, and so stories about terminal illness tend to serve as hinges for abled people to change their own lives. They rush to fill their existence with meaning, to assure themselves they won't be cut short the way I will be. This marketing campaign illustrates that attitude to a T. It's predicated on the idea that you can turn the lesson of disabled existence into personal motivation regarding seizing the moment. The main characters of this film physically can't get close to each other because they're severely immunocompromised. That's a hard limit, but it doesn't matter because it's not ultimately important. Every aspect of the marketing of this film screams relatable. When life keeps you apart, proclaims the cherry pink text in the trailer, "Fight for every inch." It's a good message for people struggling with a 2-hour commute to see their out-of-town girlfriend. It's not a good message for people with CF, but who gives a fuck about them, right? This isn't really about disabled people. It's not about what love between people with cystic fibrosis could potentially look like, or how terminally ill people live their lives. Our lives. It's never, ever about us. It's about Justin Linguini wanting you to seize the day, which is fine. That's a fine thing to make a movie about. But it isn't honest to act like real terminally ill people share the same risks as Justin Linguini when he seizes the day. The dignity of risk is one thing. Disabled people do it all the time. I personally have compiled a list of all the roller coasters I'm legally advised not to ride in my state, and I've been ticking them off since I was 13. But the real Fault in Our Stars couple, the real people with CF, died to meet each other, and it's disingenuous to ignore that. Our lives are different. Our situations are different. We have physical realities, not emotional struggles. Why would you make a movie encouraging people to go buy a flight ticket to see their mom, where the metaphor to communicate that is someone's actual material reality?
Thank you again so much to Claude and to Stephanie, both for sharing their experiences with me for this video. Obviously, the majority of what I pulled is from other sources online that you can find in the description below, but something that I have really appreciated about making these videos is recently having a chance to actually speak to people who know a little bit more about the sort of things that I'm talking about. I really and completely agree with everything Claude said there, and I will unpack the real-life Fault in Our Stars couple mention in the next section after the one that's just to come, because I want to talk about the movie itself for a little bit. I'm going to have a portion of this video that is just me complaining about 5 Feet Apart. I wasn't intending on watching it for myself. I made quite a few videos about It Ends With Us before I watched that video, but the Wikipedia page mentioned that it portrayed cystic fibrosis as contagious via cough, and I needed to watch it for myself to make sure that that wasn't true. That's maybe the one thing that I can say positively about this movie, is that I don't believe that it portrayed cystic fibrosis itself as contagious via cough, just the specific bacteria that Cole Sprouse's character had. There's not much else that I can say kindly about this movie. But what Claude said is true, and especially the part about how this was a movie about how Justin Baldoni wants to inspire the able-bodied people. You can see that just in the way he was talking about the film when it was being promoted.
I am so excited because tomorrow we are dropping the very first trailer for my very first film, 5 Feet Apart, starring my good friends Haley Lou Richardson and Cole Sprouse. It is an exploration of love where we ask the question, what if you couldn't touch the person that you love the most? I cannot wait for you guys to see this film. Here's a little clip.
As we have discussed, you can absolutely see it in the marketing of the film, and you can see it in the film itself. I went ahead and arranged an internet-friendly numbered list. Let's do that next. Okay, I'm moving quickly through these grievances because other than a couple of the ones towards the end about the conceit of the film and its handling of some of its characters being irresponsible, a lot of my issues with the movie itself are probably a little bit less important overall. But I do just kind of want to give you a quick summary of some things about this movie that I found weird and bad, and kind of contrary to a stated expectation of raising awareness and being anything else other than schlocky sick teen slop. We still have a couple of other ways that this whole thing gets even worse, but when I said I was going to have a section of the video where I'm just complaining about 5 Feet Apart, I meant it. That's what this is. Number 1. The bookends of this movie, the opening monologue as well as the closing scene, are from the protagonist Stella, as she talks about how human touch is almost as important as the air we breathe, and how she never knew that until she needed Will, Cole Sprouse's touch, and could not have it. At the end of the movie, spoiler warning for the 2019 sick teen drama 5 Feet Apart, this little speech replays now that we have context for their relationship and they've broken up. And it ends with an explicit directive that if you're watching this and you're able to, touch him, touch her. Life's too short to waste a second. This sucks. This sucks so bad for all the reasons Claude has already laid out. This use of air we breathe versus touch as a metaphor is something they also used on their Instagram. 2. The retired nurse on set to advise for accuracy either did a very bad job or she was just not listened to. I do have to admit that I am probably much better at noticing this post 2020 than I would have been if I had watched it before then, but holy shit, the mask hygiene in this movie is borderline non existent. I get it, they weren't going to have them fully masked up in every scene, I guess, but also, why not? Why decide that you want to tell a love story about two immunocompromised people if you do not then want to lean into the realities of that life, and instead you just want an excuse to set your teenage romance drama inside of a hospital? Point number 3. I can't tell if the throwaway line about Stella having clinical OCD is meant to be a literal thing that I should understand about her character, or maybe if I should understand her saying to her YouTube audience that she has clinical OCD as a joke that she's making that's in bad taste and inherently ableist, but just how the character would convey that she's very neat. I can't tell. She says this in the context of her nurse leaving her med cart for the week in her room so that she can organize it. The concept of her having clinical OCD never comes up again, so I think it's just meant to be how I understand and learn that Stella is neat. But she's later described as having control issues, which is fine and much less offensive than misusing a label like obsessive compulsive disorder to mean tidy but quirky about it. As far as I've seen, there was no mention of an OCD diagnosis in the book either, and I kind of think that if Baldoni thought that he was doing OCD rep, that he would have bragged about it. It was just an incredibly weird moment in a movie that I would think would try to be careful since it wants to imagine itself as some sort of thoughtful representation. And if you were like, hey, that's pretty unrealistic, what the hell about her being left all of her medications on a cart for the week, see point number 2, re them clearly not listening to anybody about accuracy. Point number 3. Justin Baldoni's very pregnant wife is there, and he grabbed her butt on set and then posted a picture of it and asked for captions, like a caption contest, specifically PG-13 captions, to give out tickets to see his movie about dying teenagers. Maybe I should have mentioned this part when I was talking about the marketing, but it was technically on Baldoni's personal Instagram and not the one from the film. Point number 5. Speaking of Justin Baldoni's then pregnant wife, this movie, like Justin Baldoni, has a weird thing about babies. I'm only telling you about half of it right now, but the protagonist, Stella, who has free range of the hospital like all of the other immunocompromised patients do until a later development in the plot, likes to go down to the NICU and watch the babies. I mean, I guess she's through the glass, and they sometimes have to remember to have her wear a mask, so it's not necessarily included in my, like, this is not how any kind of precaution things works. But man, it's weird. It's weird, considering Baldoni's whole natalist feminist, it's equality when I love it when my wife has my babies thing. Point number 6. The movie decided to be about the terminally ill, and then it resented being about disabled characters. No real consideration is given to the physical limitations of these characters. In fact, it is easily solved by being brave and to flout a bit of the invisible contact precautions, even though they're already being flouted to allow these characters to be in the same room at all. The actress who played Stella did a mostly serviceable job, except that the cannula is clearly not understood as anything other than a piece of her costume. She runs up hospital stairwells in it, runs faster than an elevator, and she breathes a little bit heavily once she's found and pretending to be sleeping in the waiting area for the NICU, but she's neither written nor acted as if her lung function is as limited as we're told it is, and it gets actively distracting. Point number 7. The movie lies about how insurance works just so that it can make a point about a disabled character it will later kill off feeling like a burden. The character, the token gay one in the film, tells Stella about his full coverage treatment insurance going away when he turns 18, leaving him responsible to pay for his treatment alone. There is, of course, an emotional weight to hearing someone say, "What do you get from loving me? You get to pay for my treatment and watch me die." That is, of course, a real and true thing that people have to deal with. But we are presented with no reason that this character would not be on his mother's insurance, and the Affordable Care Act had existed for about 10 years as of the time of the movie being made. So I don't see a lot of excuse for lying about whether or not you age out of your parents' insurance at 18 versus 26 just to manufacture the tear-jerking moment. It was so factually incorrect that it startled me. Maybe if they had had him be estranged, maybe, but even still, he would almost certainly be eligible for Medicaid even if that was the case, and he wouldn't age out of Medicaid at 26 or 18. However, that, as with accuracy, is not a concern for the movie because Baldoni does not intend on keeping his gay character unburied enough to actually grapple with that. Point number 8, let me know if you saw this one coming. There is Baha'i propaganda. Stella reads a book about the soul and immortality not long after looking at a task on her to-do list titled Afterlife? And I knew before I looked it up that this would be a book by a Baha'i author, and it was. I was correct. I assumed that this would be as explicit as the Baha'i propaganda got, but then they also later have Stella tell Will about a theory she likes, about birth and death actually being the same, because when you're in the womb, you're experiencing that reality, and now you're experiencing another reality, and what if it's birth again, just on the other side of it, and so it and death are the same thing? The womb world drop is, of course, the other half of the baby thing I mentioned earlier. I did an entire live stream the other night reacting to Baldoni's little TED Talk where he posits this exact thesis about birth and death being the same thing. This is like if the director of The Fault in Our Stars was a Scientologist and Hazel Grace read a book about Dianetics and then had a conversation with Augustus about how that's probably what's going on. It's very, very weird. Point number 9. In a desperate and fruitless attempt to beat the soulless cash grab ripoff of The Fault in Our Stars allegations, 5 Feet Apart opts to kill off neither of its main characters and instead to kill off that one gay supporting character. And the way it does this is genuinely confusing to me. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of plot, even though I'm not bothering to give you a full summary here, because I truly feel like you get the gist from everything else we're discussing here around this movie. But at some point while they're dating, Stella sets up a big, elaborate scavenger hunt for Will for his birthday, and the final clue leads him to a surprise party that she's throwing with some of her friends, some of his friends, and Poe, the gay character who has been breaking up with his boyfriends on account of not wanting to be a burden to them. At the party, he tells Stella that he has decided to get back together with his boyfriend the next day, and then the group is caught by a nurse, lectured, and threatened with being quarantined in isolation from each other. Here's the thing, though. That happens in the middle of a movie where we have been told again and again how Cole Sprouse is carrying a deadly bacteria with no cure, that he had been on the list to receive a transplant and was taken off when he contracted this bacteria, and that the same would happen to Stella, who has been waiting for new lungs for years, were she to catch it. They throw this surprise party a few scenes into Stella's decision to begin breaking social distancing rules, which point 10 is about, so pin in that concept for now. As Poe is being brought back to his room, he tells the nurse, "I'm sorry, but it was fun." And those are his last words, because then he dies. He dies the same night, in the immediate next scene, suddenly and off-screen. Baldoni's wife hears the call light go off and goes to check on him, and he is already dead. And I had to sit with this scene, with Baldoni's general ethos and later behavior, and think for quite a while before I could settle on whether or not I thought the movie was explicitly trying to say that they had killed Poe via party and their own recklessness. At first, I kind of assumed that they did. I had a knot in my stomach during that scene, knowing that there was only so much movie left and that Poe was going to die. And my brain, especially after sitting there for upwards of an hour watching prevention protocols be ignored, filled in blanks that they must have meant that he had contracted Will's illness at the party and then died from it. And then they just greatly shortened the timeline of how long it would take for him to pass from complications of that for the sake of dramatics. But the longer I sit with it, the less I think that that's true. I think the point of it, especially given his last words being that the party was fun, is that we are meant to be glad that Poe went to this party, since he would have died anyway. Which makes me feel a bit like we're also supposed to be glad, in a bittersweet way, that he doesn't have to be a burden on his mother/boyfriend. And that makes me want to go bang my head against the wall really, really hard, which I shouldn't do, because I'll give myself a migraine. If Poe did die because of the party, that is also portrayed in a bad and confusing way. I also saw criticism of the film from the cystic fibrosis community for the way Poe did pass away being completely inaccurate, played for shock value rather than any sort of realism for how drawn out and awful the process can be of losing a friend to this disease. There's also a whole nother conversation that could be had here about killing off your only gay character and only your gay character, playing at reuniting him with his lover just to kill him suddenly. And I don't think that's necessarily less important here, even though this particular video is more focused on the injustices towards the disabled in this movie. There are gay disabled people, though, who could have had much better representation than this movie provided, where they could have been more than a card to play for emotional and then shock value. But this is a numbered list, and none of these are full conversations, or else I will end up having to talk about 5 Feet Apart for 5 hours. So finally, number 10. This movie explicitly romanticizes Stella's risk-taking. She gives a big rousing speech about how cystic fibrosis is a thief, but today she is the thief instead, that she will be stealing 1 foot back from the illness, which she then does by using a pool cue to stay 5 feet away from Cole Sprouse, usually while they're both unmasked. Their relationship does eventually end at the end of the movie. He breaks up with her after she has a lung transplant, but not before she cries that she doesn't want the lungs and that it isn't worth living if she can't have him. I suppose you could say that given that the movie ends with them broken up, that the movie was at least trying to convey that this wasn't true, that it was a thing Stella believed incorrectly. It's the sweeping inspirational music under her decision to take the risk, though. The way Poe, before he dies, cheers when he watches her video announcing it. The way the movie was marketed with the "I'm so in" response that Will gives to her idea of being this reckless. It frames all of this as more exciting and aspirational than the big tearjerker climax where Cole Sprouse leaves her for her own good. In the book, I guess the ultimate ending is ambiguous, and so I guess I only actually have 2 positive things to say about this movie. Except it's more like 1.5, because of course they did film an alternate ending that is also ambiguous. The ambiguous ending implies that the two might get back together 8 months later after all, because they see each other in an airport and Stella stands 5 feet away from him instead of 6. On the movie, he simply watches her video and then we see him sitting on a rooftop. I do think that the issue of framing this decision to flounce actual agreed upon scientific protections as your entire conceit for your film, to frame it positively and as the impetus for the young love you're hoping will inspire your audience to seize the day, is huge and enormously irresponsible. I agree with all of the takes we've heard so far that say that. But next, I would like to zoom back out and get to the other ways that this movie was deeply exploitative and maybe stolen. Way more likely stolen than It Ends With Us is. But next, I want to zoom back out and get back to the other ways that this movie was deeply exploitative and maybe stolen. Much more likely stolen than It Ends With Us was. Okay, we are keeping with our theme where we've been getting more progressively fucked up as we go, but I want to say now we are reaching the point where I'm no longer making a statement of value to what level anything is fucked up now that we're in the home stretch here. And with that said, I am also going to start with things that were seemingly above board or not corrected at the time. A Refinery 29 article from around the time of the release of the film hails the couple that Claude mentioned in their portion earlier, the so-called real-life Fault in Our Stars couple, and calls them the inspiration for the film, as do a couple of other sources I read from at the time. I have not seen Justin Baldoni directly cite the so-called real-life Fault in Our Stars couple as inspiration, though it's more than possible I have simply missed it and he has. And also, I said just now I have not seen Justin cite them as inspiration, not that I don't think they were part of the inspiration. I have mentioned it already, but The Fault in Our Stars was a 2012 young adult novel by John Green. It got a movie adaptation in 2014, from which 5 Feet Apart lifted many, many of its visuals, and the movie's characters consistently hit a lot of rehashes of scenes and dynamics and even conversations that happen in John Green's original book in a way that felt a bit troubling to me to watch. We know already from the Variety announcement, though, that Baldoni's pitch for the movie was that it was in the vein of The Fault in Our Stars. Something very clear, and as I mentioned, it feels very much like a soulless cash grab adaptation of that. You don't have to have any particular fondness for the movie, but I do feel as though the novel version of The Fault in Our Stars had a very different underlying ethos and attitude towards the terminally ill themselves than 5 Feet Apart does. But the confidence with which these other outlets speculated in their write-ups that 5 Feet Apart was inspired by Katie and Dalton Prager was quite honestly pretty convincing to me. Here, I'll read. The romance in 5 Feet Apart bears a significant resemblance to Katie Prager, née Donovan, and Dalton Prager's highly publicized love story. The media called them the real-life Fault in Our Stars couple. As you'll see in 5 Feet Apart, the course of Stella and Will's relationship runs quite differently than Katie and Dalton's, but the circumstances are very similar. As 18-year-olds, Katie and Dalton met in 2009 on a Facebook page for sufferers of cystic fibrosis. Like all CF patients, the teenagers could not be physically intimate, though they shared love messages back and forth. The risk of cross-infection was heightened because Dalton had Burkholderia cepacia, a bacteria resistant to antibiotics that often leads to lung function decline. This particular bacteria is a major plot point in 5 Feet Apart. Will has B. cepacia, making it even more essential that he stay away from Stella. At the risk of potentially getting B. cepacia herself, Katie's doctor recommended she not meet Dalton in person. Katie went anyway. Their first date was at a fair. She soon contracted the infection. Katie and Dalton both passed away in 2016, 5 days apart from each other. The media did indeed love to call them the real-life Fault in Our Stars. They loved the tragedy spectacle of teaching people about a disease they may not have otherwise heard about via a book with characters who had a different disease being used as a metaphor for these real-life people. And as Claude pointed out, while they did have autonomy and they decided to take the risk to meet each other, they also both got significantly sicker following Katie contracting the infection, both receiving lung transplants and passing shortly thereafterward. So, for that to be a highly romanticized plot point in a movie for teenagers, one that pretends that it wants to be for teenagers with cystic fibrosis in particular when it remembers, is not only irresponsible, but also, given that these were real people, completely ghoulish, in my opinion. This could be one of several examples of Justin Baldoni's tragedy vampire tendencies, or it could be a coincidence that he pitched a movie in the vein of The Fault in Our Stars with so many similarities to this real-life couple, because there are also 2 other claims for the inspiration for 5 Feet Apart. Justin Baldoni claims that 5 Feet Apart was inspired by Claire Wineland, the activist the movie is dedicated to. And that does seem to be true, at least in part, regardless of our final pieces we're moving through now, of our fucked up meow meow directorial debut iceberg. I say this because the main character is a YouTuber, though that very rarely ends up mattering to the plot. And Claire Wineland, as mentioned when she came up in one of those article polls earlier, was a YouTuber herself. Justin Baldoni met her for his own YouTube-hosted project, his My Last Days docuseries about the terminally ill. I'm reading from a 2019 Hollywood Reporter write-up. 7 years ago, when filming his documentary, My Last Days, a meeting with Claire Wineland rocked Baldoni's world, he says. She was the one who told me that 2 people with CF have to stay 6 feet apart. I'm a hopeless romantic, and Romeo and Juliet was my favorite play of all time. I just thought, how interesting that the one person that should be able to understand you more than anybody is the one person you have to stay away from, Baldoni told The Hollywood Reporter, adding, her soul is in this movie, and it wouldn't be made without her. Later in the interview, he says, we became really close, and she was like a little sister to me. We were talking one day, and I said, give me the inside scoop. What happens in these hospitals? Have you ever dated somebody with CF? And she was like, no! Exclamation mark. She told me she didn't have many friends with CF for a few reasons, one of which because she hated watching her friends pass away, and she was the one who told me that 2 people with CF have to stay 6 feet apart. I'm a hopeless romantic, and Romeo and Juliet was my favorite play of all time. I just thought, how interesting that the one person that should be able to understand you more than anybody is the one person you have to stay away from. I told her, this is a movie. Should we go do this? I hired her as a consultant, and she unfortunately passed away just before I could show her my director's cut. It's something I'm still dealing with. And via People, Wineland was able to attend a table read with the cast and crew, after which she gave a heartfelt speech. She was so grateful that finally she was going to have representation, Baldoni says, and she always felt like her story was worthy of being told. How much of the film and filming did Wineland see? She got to hear it at the table read, and then we Skyped. We'd FaceTime a few times, and then she got the call for the lung transplant. Wineland died 1 week after her transplant last September. But Baldoni wants audiences to find hope in 5 Feet Apart and in Wineland's story. So I hope that Claire did like what she saw, and that she was excited about representation. But it is a bit frustrating for me to hear Baldoni say that she always felt like her story was worthy of being told, pat himself on the back for that, while not telling her story. He's willing to admit that this is not her story. Claire Wineland's story was not a love story with another cystic fibrosis patient. He told us that she told him that. She was a public activist with her own foundation. She was scammed by the first nonprofit she was with, the Clarity Project, who took advantage of her work. He worked with her for My Last Days, yes, and he does seem to have modeled Stella in part after Claire. Again, I will not dispute. But this is a movie where he picked up an insert of Claire Wineland and dropped her into an incredibly dangerous romance that he was romanticizing, and would then package being about how you should touch the person you love if you can. And also, that bears a striking resemblance to a real-life tragedy that the media marketed as a love story. And there's just also so little story to 5 Feet Apart beyond the love story. Even the dead sister backstory feels more like it's a service to get Stella to shut down first and then open up later to Will, more than it does anything meant to round Stella out as a character. It's there so that Will can chide her for being a sick girl with survivor's guilt. I cannot express how bad this movie is, which is why I'm not even dwelling on all the other bullshit Baldoni said in this interview, including the credit he gave himself for not shying away from the pain of cystic fibrosis on account of he left in one scene where she coughs productively. It's also interesting to me that these two articles, much like the ones after the promo for It Ends With Us stopped going his way, are chronologically after he had decided to spend that 1 week suddenly promoting the voices of actual cystic fibrosis patients around the same time as he got backlash from that same community. If I am being in good faith here, perhaps these articles only ever would have come out once the movie was in theaters, and therefore Justin wouldn't have had a chance to be doing press about Claire Wineland prior to the film's release, for reasons that don't mean that this was a sudden pivot into pretending to care about the causes closest to the source material, like he did with It Ends With Us as well. And also, I didn't want to give this its own section, but I do want to clarify that the movie was announced and developed before the book, and that I have confirmed by reading interviews with the author of the YA book that the YA book was written after the screenplay was finished, as she wrote a sample first chapter based on the screenplay. The book was released sooner than the movie, and the book's author says that it was an open writing assignment at Simon & Schuster. She was given the screenplay and told to write a sample first chapter, and then contracted to write the book. A lot of movies get novelized this way, especially for teenagers and children. The book was based on the screenplay. If you knew that this was a book and you've been watching this and wondering why I'm acting like it's all Justin Baldoni's fault if he was just adapting something, that's why. That's why we're discussing the movie as a completely separate thing for the book, other than when I said she doesn't have OCD in the book. And I mention that now because it is another measure of good faith that I am giving to Justin Baldoni. I am not accusing him that the novelization exists solely because this movie was an exercise in exploitative plagiarism, just that it likely always would have gotten a novelization on account of it explicitly wanted John Green's fans and was reheating by then 5-year-old Augustus Waters but charmless nachos for the fandom it was trying to build on its Instagram account. I want that to count for something, that I'm giving him any grace at all. I want you to understand that that means that I am being honest with you, because it is very difficult for me to have any sort of good faith about Justin Baldoni. Maybe especially because of this next part. We have already discussed this in my video about Jenny Slate's complaint and the then recent articles about all of this, so you may know that this is where we were always going to end up, but we are at the portion of the video now where I need to talk about Travis Flores. Remember, I said My Last Days was going to come back up? Not just with Claire, with Travis, too. As of filming the prior parts of this video, I had never seen an episode of Baldoni's sexploitation project, My Last Days, but I decided at pretty much the last possible second that I needed to watch at least the one that he had done with Travis Flores, who I otherwise only knew from a handful of social media posts I had seen from him and later his family, and from recent media coverage about Justin Baldoni. Like Claire Wineland, Baldoni met Travis Flores while he was working on the My Last Days project. And like Claire Wineland, Travis Flores was an activist and cystic fibrosis patient. And like Claire, like the Pragers, the so-called real-life Fault in Our Stars couple, and like arguably the entire rest of the cystic fibrosis community and every other terminally ill person Baldoni has come across, Travis Flores was used and betrayed by Justin Baldoni. I watched Travis's episode of My Last Days on a live stream earlier today because I knew I wouldn't be able to get through it alone. And even with Baldoni's weird, forced, death-positive ideology woven throughout, even with some terribly mixed sound that was apparently composed by Jamie Heath of showing a video of his wife giving birth to Blake Lively fame, and some really weird and exploitative prompted questions and odd framing, I was so absolutely taken by this young man. Travis Flores was a writer, and that's something that may not be surprising to you if his name is familiar and you remember the conversations that have been swirling ever since it was pointed out that Justin Baldoni's lawyer once represented somebody else against him. This was that case. I have built so much else up at this point, I think, that shows you how irredeemably poorly conceived Baldoni's movie was, even outside of this. The marketing, the premise, his lack of care for accuracy or for the patients who were criticizing him. I want you to understand what I mean when I'm saying that this movie is exploitative and terrible on a base level, that it would have been even if Travis Flores' screenplay had not been ripped off. But when I watched that episode of Baldoni's tearjerker inspiration porn and Travis Flores' mother, who clearly loves him very, very much, started speaking about him being a writer, I sort of lost it. I started crying like 5 minutes into this little 17-minute long episode that I found otherwise very frustratingly manipulative. I can't actually genuinely endorse watching this episode of My Last Days. Travis deserved a much better platform for his story, one that would have stayed with him talking about his boyfriend or the love in his life and not cut away from one moment of hope and triumph for him into a clearly prompted conversation about what his mother is going to do when he dies, and then an awkward visit to a gravestone none of them felt very familiar with visiting. So much of the episode feels forced and coached and like an absolute waste of the charming and endearing interview they got with Travis. In the description below, I'm going to link instead to a video that he did with It Gets Better, and I highly recommend watching that instead. For now, though, I want to read from his lawsuit, back before he was eventually advised to settle and told that Baldoni's side of things had essentially infinite money to fight him if he continued to push the matter. Travis Flores unfortunately passed away last year. Travis Flores is an activist, philanthropist, motivational speaker, actor, screenwriter, and children's book author. After being diagnosed with cystic fibrosis at the age of 4 months and being given just a few years to live, Flores has battled cystic fibrosis for 30 years to develop a successful life and career. Flores has become a powerful influencer in the cystic fibrosis community through his activism for nonprofit foundations like Make-A-Wish, through his online blogging and YouTube channel, through his speaking engagements across the country, and through various other works in the entertainment industry. Beginning in approximately 2010, Flores began writing a fictional screenplay inspired by his own life and struggles entitled 3 Feet Distance. 3 Feet Distance is about a group of chronically ill teens who come together to share their stories and learn that physical distance does not define their relationships. In October 2015, Damien Pictures, an affiliate of Universal, optioned Flores' screenplay and began pre-production, attaching a cast and director to the project. Concurrently, Flores registered his work with the Writers Guild of America and obtained a registered copyright. Although Damien Pictures did not end up making 3 Feet Distance into a film, Flores continued pitching 3 Feet Distance to film studios and other parties interested in developing his work. In February 2016, Ambry Genetics, a company whose primary mission is to sell genetic testing, including for cystic fibrosis, expressed interest in 3 Feet Distance. At Ambry's request, pursuant to an express agreement to keep the script confidential and a standard implied agreement in the entertainment industry to forgo using the script without attaching Flores emailed a copy of that screenplay to several Ambry representatives, including defendant Caleb Remington. In January 2017, defendant CBS Films announced that it had decided to begin development of an untitled film from defendant Justin Baldoni and his production company, defendant Wayfarer Entertainment, about teens with cystic fibrosis, which would be Baldoni's feature film debut as both a director and a producer. The year after the announcement of Baldoni's untitled film, Baldoni asked Flores to appear in a documentary series called My Last Days about young people with terminal illness. Flores agreed, but made a concerted effort to avoid disclosing any portion of 3 Feet Distance to Baldoni. Flores kept his screenplay from Baldoni, both because Flores had a policy of keeping his work confidential and because Baldoni was working on the feature film project that Flores viewed as competitive. Unbeknownst to Flores, however, Baldoni already had a different source to provide him with information about 3 feet distance. As it turned out, Baldoni's film, which became titled 5 Feet Apart, would copy numerous elements of 3 feet distance. Moreover, Baldoni consulted extensively about the content of 5 Feet Apart with Caleb Remington, one of the representatives of Ambry, to whom Flores sent the screenplay for 3 feet distance. It has now become apparent that Remington provided the script, or large portions thereof, to Baldoni and or others working on 5 Feet Apart, and that 5 Feet Apart copied numerous key elements of 3 feet distance. The suit then moves into the claims of 5 Feet Apart copying 3 feet distance as homework, but changing it up a little, as my chat put it when we read this out loud earlier. I want you to bear in mind everything else we talked about too. So if we take away the portion of the video that was inspired by Claire Wineland, where Stella is a YouTuber, and we take away the portion of the video that it was likely pitched on, being based on the Pragers, the so-called real-life Fault in Our Stars couple, how nearly everything that comes up as copied here comprises about anything else I even mentioned from the movie during my numbered list segment. This is why I wanted to present the video building up like this. I don't think that all of the theories presented here for which chronically or terminally ill people he was exploiting compete with each other. I feel like the answer is all of them. 5 Feet Apart is substantially similar to, or even strikingly similar to 3 feet distance, in the following ways, among others. Mood. The mood of both stories is extremely similar in that both are tear-jerking romances. Theme. A theme of both works is the importance of touch in relationships, and yet the ability of people to maintain closeness even when they are unable to touch each other. Another theme that the works share is that the lead character has emotional barriers to connecting with other people. A third theme that the works share is the importance of living in the here and now. Both are works set in a group environment where a number of chronically ill teens have come together. Both works center around a narrator-protagonist and prominently feature the narrator's platonic friend and the narrator's love interest. In 3 Feet Distance, the narrator-protagonist is Alex, and in 5 Feet Apart, the corresponding character is Stella. In 3 Feet Distance, the platonic friend is Kevin, and in 5 Feet Apart, the corresponding character is Poe. In 3 Feet Distance, the love interest is Jesse, and in 5 Feet Apart, the corresponding character is Will. Stella and Alex are both 17-year-old cystic fibrosis patients who have barriers to creating new relationships, who learn to live in the here and now, and are willing to push the bounds of the medical guidance for CF patients to maintain physical distance so that they can pursue romance. In each work, the narrator initially does not want to talk about their dead sister, but the narrator ultimately discloses having a dead sister. Moreover, although the dead sister is not physically present in either work, either during the present time or in flashbacks, each work extensively addresses the sister's death, playing a key role in the narrator's emotional development. For example, just as Stella learns from her sister Abby that she must live in the here and now and be spontaneous, Alex learns from his sister Mackenzie to do things he has never done and to live life rather than thinking life. The fact that the sister is not present in either work also reinforces the theme that relationships can remain meaningful even when people cannot physically touch each other. Kevin and Poe are the platonic opposite-sex friend of the narrator. Both of them have their own romantic interests, but express difficulty committing. In the end, both also end up realizing their mistake in failing to commit to their love interest, but end up being unable to follow through in declaring their love because illness gets in the way. The ensemble cast in both films is less relevant than the three main characters, but it is noteworthy that both works feature one nurse who plays a significant role and one doctor who plays a minimal role. And I also want to note, with Poe and the plotline for his romantic relationship being noted as something copied from 3 Feet Distance, that I was struck when watching the My Last Days episode with Travis by how that character being gay at all felt like it was some sort of nod and reference towards Travis. Travis came out on My Last Days, one of many moments where he had infinitely more charm than the Meow Meow could ever hope to muster. I feel really angry about this, so angry that I feel I can't really even dwell on it without making myself cry. So for now, let me continue. Plot, pace, sequence of events, and dialogue. Numerous distinctive events occur in both works and are highly similar. In both works, mementos play an important role in helping to overcome the barrier of being physically distanced. In both works, the narrator has one or more important mementos from their dead sister. Alex has the journal, Stella has the artwork on her wall, and the stuffed panda. In addition, the narrator shares mementos with their love interest. In 3 Feet Distance, Alex sends the journal to Jesse. In 5 Feet Apart, Will gives his drawings of Stella to her. Both works include sex, but not involving the narrator or the love interest. In 3 Feet Distance, Kevin has sex with Amber. In 5 Feet Apart, Will lends his room to 2 of his friends to have sex. Both works introduce the narrator's platonic friend relationship early in the work and make the nature of the relationship clear by having one call the other an asshole. In both works, one of the characters is the guest of honor at a surprise party that the other main characters plan. In both works, the narrator initially resists the temptation to get involved in a romantic relationship, but confesses feelings to their love interest while under the influence of drugs. Both works show the narrator and their love interest pushing the boundary set for romantic relationship while skinny dipping. In both cases, the narrator talks about their dead sister even though the event is supposed to be romantic. Although 3 Feet Distance shows both good and bad events happening at a dock, 5 Feet Apart splits the water scene into 2 parts, the skinny dipping at a pool and the more dangerous scene at a bridge. Both works feature a forbidden kiss between the 2 main characters. In 5 Feet Apart, the kiss takes the form of mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, but it nevertheless serves the same purpose of showing the ephemeral fulfillment of the main character's desire to be physically close. At the end of both works, the main characters have to separate, and one of the main characters discloses that their death is imminent. The similarities between the 2 works extend far beyond the limited examples referenced. Some of the similarities are seemingly small, like the wardrobe choice of showing the main character for the first time wearing a V-neck t-shirt. Others are more significant to the overall development of the works. And here is what the recent LA Times coverage of Justin Baldoni wrote about the lawsuit and its eventual voluntary dismissal in its intro. In 2020, Travis Flores became one of only a handful of people in the world ever to receive a 3rd double lung transplant. Diagnosed as a baby with cystic fibrosis, a genetic disorder that causes mucus to build up in the lungs and other organs, Flores had defied doctors' predictions that he wouldn't live past age 5. At 29, he underwent the rare procedure in hopes of further extending his life. But as Flores recovered, his thoughts were consumed by another looming battle, this one with actor and filmmaker Justin Baldoni. Baldoni, best known at the time as an actor on the CW's Jane the Virgin, had made his directorial debut in 2019 with 5 Feet Apart, the story of 2 cystic fibrosis patients who fall in love. Baldoni said the film was inspired by a different CF activist, to whom it was dedicated, but Flores maintained that it bore striking similarities to a screenplay he had written earlier, 3 Feet Distance. After his 3rd transplant, Travis said, "The stress of this is killing me," Teresa Flores, his mother, recalled in an interview with The Times. Through some donations, he got enough money to hire a lawyer. In September 2021, Flores sued Baldoni for copyright infringement in federal court. 7 months later, he voluntarily dismissed the lawsuit, telling his family that his legal team advised him that pursuing the case against a high-profile defendant with significant resources would be difficult. Baldoni, who has denied any wrongdoing, was, quote, "absolutely not," end quote, aware of Flores' screenplay before making 5 Feet Apart. A spokesperson for the filmmaker and his production company, Wayfarer Studios, told The Times. When Brian Friedman gets asked why he would defend Baldoni now against Blake Lively after suing him on behalf of Travis Flores, he gives some mealy-mouthed bullshit about how the case was dismissed without any wrongdoing being admitted to on Baldoni's part, which is similar to Friedman's statements on his own behalf when he's asked about his own settled sexual assault allegations. Alright, so in terms of this plagiarism claim, somehow it is how confidently this film rips off The Fault in Our Stars that makes many of these claims feel more compelling to me than they might otherwise. Many of the exact things outlined in the suit felt to me as though they were also rip-offs of something, even though I sometimes struggled to place exactly what it was ripping off. With the exception of, like, the Baha'i propaganda and the womb world mention, very little about this movie felt original at all, and those parts only feel original because of how goddamn strange Justin Baldoni is. Not only am I sure that Travis Flores' script did a better job at many of the things that struck me as so weird and bad and poorly done in Baldoni's version, but I also find a version of events where the same creative team that so confidently ripped off John Green was also just dumping real-life tragedy porn, character traits that looked like Claire Wineland, and also including bits from a script some guy who was a consultant had read a few years back. All of that goes into the mix. That's incredibly easy for me to believe. Just like I find it incredibly easy to believe that Justin Baldoni is so full of himself that it felt like a favor to then go meet this guy and put him on his exploitative reality show. That it felt like a favor to winkingly turn a character gay in reference to him and then to hinge that character around a fear of being a burden. 5 Feet Apart made around $9 million, and Justin Baldoni plugged Travis's GoFundMe on television, spoke about how he knows what a struggle finances can be on the chronically and terminally ill. I want to read a few posts that have been circulating on social media about all of this. Tim Flores, Travis's father, shared a post from Michelle Ciappa. Michelle wrote, Justin Baldoni has built his career on others' struggles, and it's time people know the truth. My dear friend, a creative and kind soul, had his screenplay 3 Feet Distance stolen by Justin and turned into 5 Feet Apart. He fought until his dying breath for the recognition he rightfully deserved. Exploiting pain for profit without crediting those who inspire these stories is unacceptable. It's time for accountability. Tim shared it and wrote, This is the illustrator who did the illustrations for Sparky the Spider, which is Travis Flores' children's book. The word of this is spreading. Justin Baldoni, we are not going away, we are only getting bigger. And Terry, Travis's mother, responded, I can attest that this is true. Justin Baldoni is the lowest of lows. Tim's father also wrote in a reply to another comment, I just want Travis's recognition. He asked me a long time ago, don't say anything or do anything. These studios are close to the people who took the idea of the script, and they don't play fair, and they have unlimited funds. I don't care. Travis has passed away, and come hell or high water, someone is going to recognize his work and make it right. Another response from Tim to another comment. It's not the money now, it's the recognition Travis never got and should have. He tried to work with Justin on a remedy. He sought guidance and help from Hollywood elitist lawyers, and because he didn't have the deep pockets, he was pushed away and was told to accept it. All he wanted was maybe a writer's credit or something, but got nothing, and I told Travis I'll get his recognition when it's time, and it's time. As far as the movie goes, Terry and I watched it, and because we read the script of Travis's, it just made us that much more upset for Travis. I will say this, Travis's script is much better, and his ending was the best part of the entire script. When I started this deep dive, I knew that there were fundamental issues with the very premise of 5 Feet Apart. I knew that there had been a poorly received influencer marketing campaign, and I also knew on a cerebral level that Baldoni has a very well-documented and monetized fixation on death. But it wasn't until I was in the process of working on this that all of that coalesced for me for how fucked up this movie is. I'm completely unable to validate how much money was donated from any of the 5 Feet Apart or Wayfarer projects towards cystic fibrosis research, though I am positive that it's not a figure that is nearly noticeable compared to the amount that the movie took home at the box office or paid to its former child actor stars. There are some tax documents in a Reddit thread in the description below. You can do your own research on that portion, because for me, morally, short of having given his full profits to research or aids for patients, and also to Travis Flores, who was still alive for several years worth of Baldoni being rich, and apparently having endless resources for his own legal battles against Flores and later attempts to bury Blake Lively, as well as the families of the other terminally and chronically ill patients he ripped off, I just don't think any of that would work for me. I think Baldoni's exploitation of the sick and the dying would be a worthwhile conversation, even completely divorced from the It Ends With Us fallout. And I think it's a worthwhile conversation, even if a few $100,000 were donated from his exploitation. I think it's also a conversation that doesn't even begin and end with It Ends With Us. Baldoni has produced several seasons of My Last Days, and he's been in several lawsuits. Wayfarer's entire business model seems to be about making these sorts of movies, or at least trying to. And that's the sort of thing we're referencing in the lives when we call Justin Baldoni a tragedy vampire or Count Sagula. It's his desire and apparent success at finding a tragedy in somebody's life and sucking out any potential value he can claim for himself and for the purposes of making himself look better, for the purposes of proselytizing his religious beliefs and his views on death, for the purpose of making feel-good entertainment to convince the ableds to live their life to the fullest. Since this is just womb world all over again, and death is just like birth. It's just an interesting thought experiment, not a lived reality that anybody has to grieve. And I kind of doubt anybody who's not primarily on Blake Lively's side here is still watching, either my channel or this video in particular, but this is the conclusion. So here's where I tie it back to the It Ends With Us stuff, and where I make a point that I know that I've made several times over in my coverage of all of this. Your like or dislike of Blake Lively is not relevant here. The fact that Justin Baldoni seems to be so obviously predatory is, and so predatory that he's gotten away with it for so long because his choice of victims up until now have had so many less resources to fight back and have their story told. The same way that Blake Lively's complaints protected not only the other women on the set with her, but also exposed the predatory astroturfing tactics PR groups like Nathan and Abel's tag agency does, it also calls our attention to the fact that this guy is a fucking freak, and that he's been a fucking freak in public for several years. It seems to be just that very few people have had the resources to actually fight back, and look at how he's treating the one who does. I also didn't really know whether or not I was going to be surprised that somebody who made 5 Feet Apart apparently flouted COVID protocols on the set of his movie, but the more I looked into the movie, the more Blake's claims of that make complete and total sense. They had to live their lives to the fullest. They had to film their little movie. They had to give Blake Lively's baby COVID. So this video got really heavy, and I can't say honestly that it was a ton of fun to work on. I mean, I do find research like this and conversations like this very satisfying, though. I didn't realize until I was finishing this up that Baldoni hits so many of the same fury points in me that Ruth Coker Burks, the so-called cemetery angel of Hot Springs, Arkansas, does. And I guess that the one small favor in all of this, if I wanted to not explode in rage, is that her awful and self-centering book about herself during the AIDS crisis was at least not adapted by Wayfarer Studios, because it seems like exactly the sort of thing Baldoni might go for, a perfect opportunity to decenter the dying and the suffering from a story about death and suffering, and also a self-professed ally who's actually full of shit. Maybe I shouldn't be speaking this into existence. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much to everybody who hung out on my research lives and who has been reaching out to me with more information for these Baldoni deep dives. As somebody pointed out on Blue Sky, Justin Baldoni is so strange in so many niche ways that the average person probably doesn't have time to get into it, and I'm happy to be of service in that way. I also have a Patreon where you can find a few extra videos from me a month. Patreon is a fantastic way to help support me financially, and you can see some names on the screen right now of some of my patrons. Thank you so much to everyone who has supported me through the Patreon, by buying me a coffee, by hanging out and watching my videos all the way through to the end, super chatting me on the lives, all of that stuff. And also, thank you again so much to Aura for sponsoring today's video. I'll be back again soon, and I think the next video might be a little bit less of a bummer, maybe. I love you. I'll be back soon. Bye. Holy shit. Bless you. Bless you again.